Hello and welcome to the second series of 3 lessons from Breakthrough Leaders with me, Zana Ryabchik, CEO at Breakthrough Global.
And with me, Bart Sale, founder of Breakthrough Global, where we've spent the past 30 years developing the breakthrough methodology to help transform companies and people looking to reach their highest level.
And this podcast is all about giving you insider tips and the know-how from the world's foremost leaders and creative talents, distilling their knowledge and experience into 3 lessons, which we guarantee will help you and your companies to unleash your potential. And you can get in touch with us at bartsale@breakthroughglobal.com to find out more. In today's episode, we'll hear from Tony Kypreos. Tony's an entrepreneur, a corporate innovator, and an investor with 30 years of leadership experience. His focus is on the interdisciplinary innovation for health, social, and environmental challenges. He's currently a key player for the UN Sustainable Development Goals Innovation Accelerator, Accelerate 2030. So, Bart, you first introduced me to Tony because he very kindly offered to write an amazing case story in the first person for us about his experience with Breakthrough at T-Mobile.
Yes, Anna, I've got a lot of time for Tony, and we've always kept in touch, off and on. And as we were doing the podcasts, I thought to myself, he would be brilliant because he's got such a wide view of everything that's going on in business and in the world today.
And we started this podcast episode by talking about how Tony first worked with Breakthrough at T-Mobile. Welcome to the podcast, Tony.
Thanks for having me, Zana, and great to see you again, and great to see you again, Bart.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Tony. We go back a couple of decades, and you were with T-Mobile, and we were brought in to work with you with the Breakthrough program. Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember it vividly, like it was 2 years ago, not 20 years ago. And it was Uli Gridson, wasn't it, that you worked with before at Wrigley's. And it was so great having Breakthrough because it not only gave us the roadmap to get through some of the real blockages and issues, but it actually helped us uncover collaborators and people that thought the same thing, but probably were afraid to ask sort of situations. So, yeah, it was a typical big telco that was growing very fast, but had overstated processes and lots of different confusing things going on. And it reminds me of Peter Drucker, where he says, don't confuse motion with progress. There was lots of motion, a lot of spinning wheels, but very little progress. So, yeah, it was a massive impact. I still remember the breakthrough events and the energy from them, and it was really great. And I mean, one consequence was that I was trying to get a project off the ground, and it was being blocked at every avenue because it didn't follow a alleged process. And we managed to get collaborators together. And one thing in terms of return on investment, that just one project in one country in 1 year created 100 million euros of incremental profit.
Wow.
So maybe you were undercharging there, Bob, but it was a massive impact. And I got promoted onto executive board on innovation and business development. I really took a lot of that learning with me, and it had an impact on my future life as well. So thank you very much. It was a gift for life.
Today, we'll learn these 3 lessons. Make your organization thrive.
That's the real challenge, trying to map out what you're good at, what you can get paid for, what you love, and what's good for the world. That and only that. Everything else is excluded.
Maximize your social impact.
You had some very cynical people, right? And you don't have to bring them on board, because if you get enough good people on board doing the right things, those barriers will be swept away.
Recognize nature's worth.
There needs to be ways in which natural capital is valued within a capitalist system. Protecting what we have is actually probably the most valuable thing we can actually do.
Lesson 1. Thriving organizations are healthy organizations. What do you think today about healthy organizations, or the fact that many of them are not, and yet people have to work in them?
And we don't just mean health in terms of health and wellness or well-being or physical health, do we? But it's about health for the planet, healthy contribution to society, all of these sort of metrics as well.
The way to do, I mean, there was actually a research article in the Lancet just less than 2 years ago, and they researched 10,000 young people between 16 to 25, and they were finding things like climate anxiety, feeling of helplessness, and the resentment they had for governments and corporations. I mean, 75% said they risk the future, and 83% think that corporations and governments are not taking care of the planet. And when you look at other research, there was something done by Imagine One, which is Paul Polman's organization, and they looked at the key concerns that the younger, and it could be in their 30s as well, people have with their organizations. They don't trust the leadership, and they have concerns about what their companies are doing. So that's a key issue within organizations, both in terms of the planetary health and actually well-being of organizations. Anxiety and not associated positively with where you work is a very negative thing. And to answer a question about making a company healthier, disruption is going to impact corporations all around. And in your career, whether you're early in your career or even more senior, you have a role to play to make your company more resilient and to skill it up and tool it up in terms of its workforce. And that's a journey. There's many things you can do, and there's no excuse now that if you're interested not to learn and find the resource. Not like when we were younger, Bart, it wasn't really on the agenda, was it? When I was at Nestle and Diageo, we didn't know about these things, so we didn't know what we were doing.
There was the odd thing on sustainability, and it was seen as something that we really need to just pay lip service to it and then avoid it as much as possible. I can remember.
Well, unfortunately, it's still very much the case now, right? Yeah. So the answer is yes, there's a sweet spot between doing these things and making your company more resilient and making it actually survive in the future. And there's obviously things to avoid. There's things that very difficult to reconcile, like fossil fuel extraction or military companies or gambling or fast fashion. So one thing to do with helping your company be more resilient and more effective is, first of all, choose the right company. That's important. And companies that have been open enough to do breakthrough, for example, and are actually doing things, they're not greenwashing, they're not lobbying, they're not hiding it from their stakeholders, are the right ones. So choose the right companies. Even in financial services, certain banks like JP Morgan or Citibank or HSBC or Barclays, they invest a lot in fossil fuels. But then there's Triodos Bank and Atom Bank, and they're very, very new age and very environmentally friendly, and they're very successful. Choose the right organizations. And then when you're within your organization, do what I did, and what Breakthrough enabled me to do. There's going to be other people that have similar sort of thoughts, but haven't come out of the bush, as it were, or they're in hiding, but they're thinking the same thing. And do your research. There's so much information out there. So the first thing I would do, and I spend about 50% of my life now reading these things, talking to people that are experts, find the courageous, smart people that are leading the way. You will learn a lot from them. And then I came across this thing called Ikigai. Have you heard of Ikigai?
Yeah.
Yeah, just give us a summary of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Japanese term. It means the meaning of life or a purposeful life. And there's 4 concentric circles, and one is what you're good at. Another one is what you get paid for, and those 2 things together is your profession. I think probably 95% of people focus all their life on their profession. That's what I was doing. But then there's 2 other circles, which is what you love and what's good for the world, and that's your mission, effectively. Really, it's those 2 circles that we're missing, and that's what I focus on 100%. So the key thing is you can't keep them separate, because your mission then becomes like a hobby or a vacation. You've got to make a career out of it, and that's the real challenge, trying to map out what you're good at, what you can get paid for, what you love, and what's good for the world. And that's been my journey, as it were, since then, finding that and only that. Everything else is excluded. Whatever it pays doesn't matter. If it doesn't fit those 4 things, it doesn't get on the bus.
So in Breakthrough, we had people working on their vision for the company, and also that overlapped with their vision for themselves and their purpose. And what we did to really push them and stretch them and get them out of their comfort zone, we had an exercise that we used to do on every program with every person where they had to come up with a 100-year project. So a project that may not actually produce results in their lifetime, but one that they could set up here and then leave as a legacy. And we used to call this the legacy exercise. And actually, some people did carry on afterwards. But why I'm mentioning it here, I remember that there were really just 3 areas that people created their legacy projects in: the environment, health, and education. And what it showed me is that whoever we interact with on this planet, more or less, at some level, and you could call that the highest level of vision or the deepest level of vision, we're all aligned in a way. Because even though we did this with hundreds of people from different countries and different companies, with few exceptions, their projects were in those 3 buckets. Wherever we're coming from, once we start to think outside of our own little world and our own lifetime, we see bigger things. Lesson 2, enroll the right decision makers to deliver your ESG goals.
There's other things you can do, which is around learning the tools. And there's something called ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and we've all heard about it, and it has some negatives and criticisms, but at least it's a framework with credibility. And what I always tell people, they say, well, how can I get this through? And the key thing is there's no point just talking to people that agree with you wholeheartedly. You've got to learn, how can you speak to a CFO? Organizations are not really people in some ways. They're legal constructs, and they have to provide dividends and maximize shareholder value. But if you can find a sweet spot and explain to your CFO there's a business case, there's savings in materials, there is less chance of potential regulation being impacted. So learn about regulations in your industry, and you'll find savings and opportunities and risk mitigations that can help you. So I think the first thing is not just to have a hobby horse, but to actually know your facts, have knowledge, and link in with other functions. Don't just sit in an ivory tower in marketing or finance or supply chain, but you've got to mix with the other functions in organization. And then you will get projects off the ground, and then you will feel better about what you're doing, and you'll make your company more resilient and more prepared for the disruptions in the future.
I think that's really interesting, that balance. And we certainly see it of recognizing the business case as well as the ethical case. And in a way, it makes me really sad because people should be doing it because it's the right thing to do. But it also makes me really happy because we've got a reason now, a set of very clear bonuses that you can get from doing the right thing.
And one of our targets there are the very companies that aren't healthy. I mean, they're the ones really. It's when we work and we're doing breakthrough and we meet some sort of cynical views or cynical people. One of the things I've always said is, well, that's why we've got a business, because there are people in the workplace that are cynical, that are helpless, that are resigned, and breakthrough can help shift that. And I think we've seen that. We've seen in 3 decades, why I'm optimistic is that I have seen a different consciousness in some businesses and some areas of business.
There's probably a lot of people who don't even know these things are coming, but you as a person who cares about it and as an employee that cares about these things, it's your agency to learn about it, expose it as a potential risk, and then instigate a project to deal with it. So there are tools and there are mechanisms to do things. And I think if the tipping points of people is not 50%, it's not a voting system. If you get 10-15% mobilized, the grumpy people will go along with it, right? And I remember, Bart, very, very vividly, you had some very cynical people at T-Mobile, and they had vested interests, right? And you don't have to bring them on board, and you don't waste energy on them, because if you get enough good people on board doing the right things, those barriers will be swept away. So innovation, for example, when I was doing stuff, it was like, innovation is very important. That's why we have to have a process that kills innovation. So basically, it was trying to block everything that was coming through. And I was threatened to be fired, and I said, "Yeah, please do so. Put me out of misery. I'm going to make this happen, whether you like it or not." And but you need people like you to mobilize and give them the tools and the techniques and the ability to connect people together and get the energy up, and then things will happen. And it's those few status quo vested interests that are holding the companies back.
One of the founding reasons for me getting into Breakthrough was because I realized that, business was now the biggest force on the planet, affecting everybody. But then, and to some extent now, business itself doesn't have a consciousness which matches that level of its power and its influence. So part of Breakthrough was to raise people's consciousness, and particularly leaders. It's not the only way that it's been done, but I think I'm proud of the fact that Breakthrough has played its part in raising consciousness of people that we've worked with beyond their work, their career, their business, into other aspects of life. And the more we can do that, it's already starting now. There's a big movement for that. You can see it across LinkedIn, for instance. Everybody's talking about purpose now. Not everybody's authentic, but everybody is talking about it. And I think we've seen new generations of leaders. I've certainly seen new generations now taking up leadership in companies that certainly have that higher consciousness than some of the leaders I met 30 years ago. Lesson 3. How much is nature worth? We're actually going through some significant transitions now. COVID was one and is not finished yet, and there'll be more ahead. Brexit was one for Britain. Ukraine is another one, which is affecting everybody globally. Where is this leading, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really, I think these are just the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. I work a lot. I've done a lot of stuff in health, environmental health, how the environment is impacting our health, such as air pollution, water pollution. I think the COVID was almost a light touch. Then you look at the war in Ukraine, that's devastating. And there was, I think, maybe 8 million people displaced, maybe more. But the trends are looking at there could be 1 billion displacements in terms of people being refugees from particularly the global south. And it takes, the economists say, it takes 200 million to have a global economic collapse. And the thing is, people don't just become refugees when there is droughts and when there is water scarcity, and then there's issues with food production, etc. There's going to be conflict as well. So there's going to be more conflicts developing. So there's no difference between a material catastrophe and a social catastrophe. So the levee breaking with Hurricane Katrina was a material breakdown, but then you got a million refugees and thousands of people dead. That's the social impact. So they will have links. So the biggest thing of all is actually keeping and protecting what we already have. And we live in a very capitalist sort of system. There needs to be ways in which natural capital is valued within a capitalist system. And there's a gentleman called Ralph Kami who works at the IMF, who's doing some great work on creating financial instruments to value nature. So I did a lecture up in Durham Business School with undergraduates and postgraduates, and try to explain to them what's the value of a whale. Well, if you pack it up and kill it, and as pet food or whatever, which still happens, it's about $40,000. If it's for whale watching, it's about $1 million a whale. But if it's it's actually $90,000 a whale. But if it's for the ecosystem value, which is like feeding phytoplankton and fishery and fish stocks, etc., it's about 2 million a whale. But we don't value that, and a tree can't be valued, and a river can't be valued. So there's really interesting work being done there, and if we can get that right, we'll make good progress. But we're still arguing about the metrics rather than getting it done. But those are sort of things that, if you're in finance and if you're in a corporation, you can join groups in that and learn about it and make an impact. So protecting what we have is actually probably the most valuable thing we can actually do.
I find the idea of starting to calculate what nature is worth absolutely fascinating, and it's something I hadn't really thought about before, other than in terms of carbon offsetting, which has got lots and lots of pros and lots of cons to it. So hearing Tony talk about this really gave me a whole new set of insights around how we can start to think about the future and protecting the planet.
Yes, and it's so important. I mean, the amount of pollution, for instance, that has been created over the years, and none of that pollution was factored into the cost of producing the goods that were then sold and we bought and we consumed. And now we're starting to do that. And a great example for me is with, I was working with Conservation International on ocean health, and we were out in the Philippines, and we were working with some local fishermen. And for years now, in the fishery, they've been hunting manta rays for food. And manta rays now are becoming very rare, and this was one of their breeding areas. So Conservation International economists, they worked out what a manta ray is actually worth to that, not just to that locality, but to that country in terms of tourist income from people and divers who want to see them. And the difference was astounding. And when this was shown to the local people, they shifted immediately from fishing mantas to protecting mantas overnight. And that's the impact it can have.
This is the part of the show where we ask you your hot seat questions. Are you ready?
I'm definitely ready.
Fantastic. All right. So number one, what inspires you in life?
I think we talked about it a little bit. It's courageous people and the underdog. So indigenous populations fighting in the Amazon just to save their lives, and I just love that sort of thing when the underdog is fighting the powerful.
What brings you energy and motivation in everyday life?
I think doing things, being able to find what we talk about, the ikigai, and getting that together and finding that cross-section and just seeing, even just looking at my kids when they're in the zone, enjoying themselves, like my son doing kung fu or my daughter's doing ballet or learning to play piano, seeing kids in the flow and doing stuff that they just do it for the pure joy of it. That's I find that we lose some of our childlike qualities as we get older and get too serious. So that being in the flow.
And if you could only take one book to a deserted island, what would it be?
Can it be How to Build a Life Raft? Or does it have to be something more serious?
It absolutely can.
But it will be something, the books that people should read, I think that really inspire them will be something like Jason Hickel, I think is really great, Less is More, or books that 1973, E.F. Schumacher wrote Small is Beautiful, and he wrote that 50 years ago, and everything still applies.
It's a fantastic
book. We've
book.
Been thinking about this. Isn't that a good, Bart?
A fantastic book. Yeah, I was really into all of that. And something you said earlier about, because I can remember when I first joined Unilever, and I was a nature boy and into the environment and so on. They thought I was nuts. So that's one thing I'm optimistic about is the generational difference that I've seen in my career. But seeing the younger generations coming in, there's already a different consciousness within that. And maybe we have to wait for some of those generational changes to get the critical mass that we need.
I very much hope so.
Tony, this has been fantastic. It's great to get back in touch with you. I think any one of our listeners can take something out of this conversation with you and start where they are, start with themselves, and start to make a difference. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for today's 3 lessons.
And have you got a question or comment or want to find out more? You can email us at bartsale@breakthroughglobal.com or connect with us on LinkedIn at Breakthrough Global or on Instagram at Global Breakthrough.
We'd love to hear your own leadership stories, and we'd also love for you to share this episode on your own social media and review and rate this podcast on the player of your choice.
And so once again, thanks to our production team, Yulia Sholtisova at Breakthrough Global and Robin Leeburn at Fairly Media. And of course, thank you for listening.